us. It is 3:45 here where we are outside of Boston, and I am Katie Novak, and I am so excited to be here with one of my favorite people, Allison Posey. And Allison and I just had a whopper of a good time writing a book on a concept that kind of goes against everything that all of us have lent our entire life to. You know, we believe in teaching and learning, and everything we do is about learning. And yet the key to successful learning is actually this process called unlearning. So Allison, could you introduce yourself and just introduce this concept of unlearning? And while Allison introduces herself, we would love for you to jump into the chat and just let us know where you are watching this webinar from. Already I can see some Pennsylvania, British Columbia, Ohio. So as you're introducing yourself, Allison is going to share a little bit about herself. And again, what is this beast unlearning?
And these names are coming up so quickly, but I'm recognizing people and I'm seeing a lot of international and across the US. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's really exciting to be here. As Katie mentioned, I'm Allison Posey. It has been so much fun working with Katie on this book. And I'm going to hold it here because I like to move around as I talk. So our thinking is that in order to learn, you actually have to unlearn. And one of the stories that we talk about in this book is one time I went on a Segway tour. I don't know if any of you have ever ridden on a Segway before, but it doesn't seem like a big deal. In order to, go on the Segway, you just turn this little knob front or back if you want to go right and left, and you just lean forward or you lean backward, right? It seems like no big deal. It was a disaster. It was so hard. I had people running and chasing me. I almost hit trees. And when I finally agreed to bail out of the tour, you felt the entire group be like, "Woo, this lady is out of here." It was so, and I realized later what I had to do was unlearn a lifetime of turning to the right means you're going to go to the right. Instead, I had to start thinking, pushing forward makes you go right. And that was it took so much energy for me to remember that. And then I was also trying to navigate the streets. We were in Washington, D.C., and I was trying to think about all the other people around me. There was so much going on in my head, I literally couldn't unlearn it, and I crashed. And I think that happens for a lot of our students. They have so much that they're trying to take on. They have some patterns and some routines and some things that they know and do automatically. And so they're trying to unlearn at the same time they're trying to learn. And anyway, I think unlearning is absolutely a critical way to think about how to get to deep learning. So that's my story.
Ron Rogers, who's a friend of ours, just said that he's taking bets on who can move around the most on Zoom. So both Allison and I are kind of like kinesthetic talkers, I guess you could say. We do have a closed captioning service, which you can turn on. There'll also be a transcript and a chat afterwards. But yes, every time I try to slow down, I excite myself again and I forget I'm trying to be deliberate. And so again, you can watch us and, if I try to stop moving, I'll forget in like 30 seconds anyway. So Ron, we love you too. So Jennifer said that she thinks Allison will move the most. So I'd put running on Katie Novak. So I'm going to start talking like this just to make sure I can cinch this one out. So we're going to be talking about this process, which is like this actual mental discomfort that you have when you are confronted with the way that you have been doing things no longer is effective. And when we talk about universal design for learning, we talk a lot about what it means to engage. And a part of engagement means that you have to put in this effort and persistence and self-regulate, because learning is actually pretty uncomfortable because you're suddenly faced with something that you believed to be true. You believed it to be tried and true and it was gonna work. And when it doesn't work, it's like, what are you talking about? So on the cover of our book, we actually put an apple. And the reason we put an apple is they do these studies, right? And I'm gonna ask all of you right now, if you were in a dark room, right? You're in a dark room, there's no light in the room, and you're holding an apple in your hand, I just want you to put in the chat box, what color is the apple? Okay, so you're holding an apple. What color is the apple? So red, green. It's so funny that I always go red apple. It's so funny. I don't ever default to green apple. Okay, now here's the thing is someone is holding an apple right now and I missed who it was.
Oh.
Now, here's the thing that's going to make your brain hurt for a moment. Allison is going to spoil all your fun. Okay. And everyone but Elsa is going to be like, what? Okay. Allison, what color is the apple in a dark room?
There is no color. The apple has no color.
And why? Why is that? That can't be, Allison. Obviously, if I'm holding a red apple, the apple has color. What are you talking about?
Yeah, so you have to have light in order to have color, because the light is going to reflect into your eyes. Without light, there is no color reflected.
No, Allison, you're wrong. You're wrong, Allison, because obviously the apple is still red. I just can't see that it's red, right? And this like focus on like in my head right now, I'm agreeing going, okay, I get what you're saying scientifically, Allison, but that apple is freaking red. And that process, that's a discrepant event. And so Daniel just said Schrodinger's apple. I probably botched the name of that scientist, but you know, what is it? The cat, right? Schrodinger's cat.
Yes, and we're getting into the theory of relativity.
Oh my, yeah, you're over my pay grade. So, but what we want to do is we want to share some things about teaching and learning that are like finding out that in a dark room there is no color. It's not that you can't see the color, it's that there is no color. And that like, feeling is a feeling that I think a lot of us are having right now with moving to this emergency remote teaching. Because it's like, okay, I have to plan my lessons. And you're like, like this is not going to work the way that I used to do it. So I'm going to drop in here some slides. And Lindy, if you could give me the opportunity to share my screen, my dear sister, Lindy, who everyone says, that's got to be your twin sister. Her picture on her Zoom is actually me. So it's not that she is my twin sister, it's that she is in my Zoom account, because last time everyone's like, it is uncanny how much you look alike. We're both
Hey,
me.
Ashley, I think you actually need to give Katie host control.
Okay, so it's so funny because Barbara said, I was wondering about that also, that like there's so many Katies right now. And it's just that Katie's moderators are Katie's sisters who are keeping everything flowing beautifully. And so we're going to share with you a presentation, and then we're also going to share with you the link to that presentation so you can access it in either way. So again, oops, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. So you can see this presentation here. I'm going to share with you the link. So if you'd prefer to look at that on your own device, you absolutely can do that. And then we'll take you through it as well. And Allison and I will go back and forth. And if you have a question, definitely pop that into the chat box, because we would love to answer questions as we're going. And Lindy or Ashley, who are my sister and my wonderful sister-in-law, will stop us and remind us that there's a question. And also they're going to be providing a back channel. So if we talk about a specific resource and you're wondering, oh, where would I find that? They will hook you up with that link as well. So what I want you to think about right now is unlearning requires change. And so let's start thinking about what is one change that you have made as you transition to this remote learning experience. And I want you to think about what was hard about making that change. And as you type in the chat and you share what's one thing that's been really hard for you about making a change, Allison, I would love for you to share what's a change you've had to make in your professional practice and how has that been hard for you?
Oh, I wasn't ready for this question to come my way.
Yeah.
You know, in a lot of ways, I already did a lot of remote work as it was, but I will share, I don't know how many of you have been to one of the CAST Institutes live at CAST, but we had to have our first one fully remote. And it was really interesting to think about how different it was to interact with people when you can't be live. it's really hard. Like even right now, I'm wanting so badly to see your faces and I'm frantically scrolling through to try to see your names. And I think for me, what's been really hard about transitioning to remote learning is reading that emotion, reading that connection between the humans. Even though I know a lot of times I misread it and I'm probably incorrect about what you're thinking or what you're feeling, and I'm just making my own guesses, I still really, I find it to be a lot trickier in the remote learning. How about you? What's been tricky for you, Katie?
For me, like what's so crazy is today I found this amazing article online. I actually put it out on Twitter. And if Lindy, if you could put the link in, that'd be amazing. But I read an article today that basically said, why are remote video conferences so exhausting? And the thing that's been really hard for me is, you know, a lot of the work that I do as an administrator is walk by work. You know, like I literally park myself in the superintendent's office for like a solid hour or two a day. And she's just like, Novak, out of here. I have a meeting. Like I love the woman, but I kind of park myself there. And so much of the work that I do day to day is like, hey, Justin, you know, calling to the guy next to me or like walking around the hallway. And now that that can't be done, I've realized that so many meetings have to be deliberate. And yesterday I actually had 11 Zoom meetings that I had to be in. And for me, I'm a very extroverted person. I want human connection. You know, I love like, you know, being around people. Having to stare at a screen all day for me has been very depressing. I'm more tired than I've ever been. And I, you know, for me, I think that has been the worst part is losing the human connection with my colleagues. You know, luckily I still have a human connection. I have 4 kids here. I have my husband, but I have not enjoyed moving all professional collaboration to a screen. That's been really, really hard for me.
And then you're asked, I don't know, you know, then I get invited to do an online cocktail hour. And I'm like, I don't even know.
I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. It is. Right. My best friends are like, oh my gosh, let's do a Zoom. I'm like, I don't know if you know what I do for work, but no, I had 11 Zooms yesterday where like I had to be on and, you know, and professional, which is like professional for me is like professional on top, party on the bottom. Like I wear pajama pants all day. And so again, I think we're all struggling with this, but what we know is that change is really, really hard. And if we want to include all of our students in an inclusive environment, we have to change what we do. And the reality is a lot of the practices that we know and that we love and that like speak to our heart, we actually have to grieve the loss of those practices because they don't work for every single child. And it's so tempting to be like, yeah, but they, you know, they work for a lot of kids. And the reality is there's so many confounding barriers and there's so many confounding variables for student success that often practices that we find to be tried and true practices work really well with students who come from privilege, who have support at home, who are not language learners, you know, who are not affected by, you know, significant disabilities, who do not, you know, who fit into dominant culture. And when we recognize that, you know, even in this country where everybody is trying incredibly hard to meet the needs of all kids, only 4 out of 10 kids are actually at grade level. And we have to recognize that the practices that we have become comfortable with don't even meet the needs of half of the kids in the country. And so we have to begin changing. And that change looks like going through what we call this unlearning cycle. Now, the concept of unlearning is very—
I want to just do a quick drum roll right there, because there it is. There is our unlearning cycle. And we are so excited about this unlearning cycle. And we hope that you find it to be valuable and helpful, and we'll talk you through it here. But sorry to interrupt you. I had to get a little winning in to get some movement too.
You were trying to get more movement. I can see what you're doing there.
Drum roll, right?
And so, but again, as we think about this, this is the process that we have to go through to let go and grieve the practices that we just become so comfortable with. And I mean, I will tell you, I was an English teacher for 12 years. For me, the idea of not doing a whole class novel was like unheard of. Like, I, of course, am going to hand out a novel to all the students. Like, they love this book. And that was a practice that I'm going to talk about a little bit about how I had to move through these stages to finally let go of what I wanted for the class couldn't be what drove my class anymore. So we're going to take you through all of these steps. And again, we would love for you to share questions at each of those stages. And we're going to help you to figure out what stage that you may be in your own unlearning cycle. So Allison, would you like to start out and talk about this concept of variability?
Oh, you knew I would want to talk about the variability.
Yeah,
I would love to. And I'll just let you all know, if you want to pick some tried and true practice that you have as we're going through this, you can use that to really kind of go through this unlearning cycle with us right here. So Katie mentioned the one she is going to think, that she's used to think about, and that's the one novel. The thing that I started immediately doing when I became a teacher was I would put the homework up on the board, and it was usually read and take notes from pages 15 to 20. And I felt very teacherly. I was 22 years old, and I felt like this is what teachers do. And I kept that practice up my whole time teaching. I would have students pretty much for homework, read and take notes. So I'm going to approach this unlearning problem using that one example of, how do I give homework? How do I think about my homework assignments? So we do invite you to think about something in your practice that you might want to work through with us. So variability, one of the first things we need to embrace when we think about unlearning is this concept of variability. It's not learning styles, it's not right and left brain. It's this idea that every single brain is so different. And that's really exciting, but I also remember as an educator, it freaked me out a little bit, because if you have hundreds of students and they all have incredibly different brains, how do I manage that? At least when I thought there were 6 or 7 learning styles, I could add, okay, here's my visual option for my visual learners. Here's my kinesthetic option. We know that that is not how the brain works. Every brain is super different. They are changing all the time. One of the most powerful things about our brain is that it's changing dynamically based on our interactions with the environment. And in every environment and in every context, we're going to be a little bit different. So we not only have variability between people, we have variability within ourselves, which kind of sounds a little existential, but I like to think of, so I can pay really good attention. If someone's talking to me about classroom practice or kiddos and learning, I am right there with you. My son is 18 years old and has been playing hockey his whole life. And I'm telling you, anytime I watch a hockey game, I have no idea what's going on. I am paying zero attention. I am spacey. I don't even know, I can't even call offsides, which, I should know by this point. So depending on the context, I'm a very different learner. I'm a very different engaged person. So so this idea of variability is represented in the UDL guidelines through those 9 dimensions of learning. The 9 UDL guidelines really align to 9 dimensions of learning. So in Unlearning, we've placed those along an axis here. You can see them: interest, persistence, self-regulation. And depending on the context, you can start to doodle out where you are in that moment with your variability. So Katie, how are you feeling right now? If you had to doodle your variability,
my remote learning. So I'm going to doodle my variability in my office when I am at work. And then I'm going to doodle my variability when I am in my house with my 4 children and my dog who barks at every person who goes by the house. And so what I've realized is that on Tuesday, I go to work on Tuesday morning. That's when the district provides lunches and technology for students who need those things. And so I go in on Tuesdays and my webinar is getting crashed. Oh my God, what a perfect time to talk about, come here, little one. We have a guest speaker who came in. No, you're on TV. Hundreds of people are watching you. So it's important that you look. 308 people are watching you. You're practically going viral. Now, what I know is that my ability to persist and pay attention on remote learning right now is very low because of someone special. So Allison, can you talk about yours while I deliver this one to his daddy?
Yes, and I want to think about, right there, this is just like your student with, a buddy next to them in a class, or something just happened in the hallway before they got into the classroom. And those things immediately can shift can shift your variability. They shift your preferences. And we all have this. This is what's really, we can predict and anticipate this variability. But until we really truly understand variability, we can't really design for it yet. So, so if you could take a moment and just think about how you differ from one context to another. Another example I love to give is when my father-in-law is in the room, I'm often very different than when he's not in the room. So even thinking about those different rooms, hi Katie. So
Oh my word.
their own context now.
Yeah. So I mean, the struggle is real. But again, the truth of this is that my ability to be really focused is contextual, because when I'm in my office and it's quiet and I have my hot coffee, and when I close the door, no one comes in, I can get so much work done. Like I can persist on a task all day. And the reality is if I start a task here, like a simple webinar, I can't even focus on that for like 10 minutes without getting distracted. So although I would say I'm a very persistent person, my ability to be persistent in a remote setting has been compromised tremendously. All right. So
Thank you all for sharing some of your thoughts in there.
So the next focus here is once we truly recognize variability, and that's to say that we're not planning anymore for individual students. We've done that for so long. And I always use this cooking analogy to say that, like, we know that casseroles don't work. We know that we can't just do the whole class novel. That's like serving a lasagna and then suddenly realizing, oh my gosh, there are people who are lactose intolerant and have gluten sensitivity and are vegan. Like they just can't simply access, they're not going to eat the lasagna. And so then I think where we automatically start to go is labeling, right? And we go, oh, well, these kids are struggling, so I'm going to do this for them. And these kids are like super sharp, so I'm going to do this to challenge them. And so many people, when I consult, will say things like, but what do you do for English language learners? Or what do you do for kids with autism? As if they have anything in common, because the variability among students with autism, or the variability among students whose English is not a first language or they're English learners, is so significant that there is not a practice that you can suddenly just stick on to certain students, because not only are they different from each other, but they're different based on the day. So having a really bad morning at home and dealing with trauma is going to change the profile of a student. And so we don't want to plan for the student. I don't want to make individual meals for every kid, because what I'm doing is I'm designing something for the kid based on the fact that I believe that kid is static, that kid's not going to change. Like, oh, I know what this kid is going to need. And the reality is we don't. We have to understand what our goals are. And instead of thinking about individual kids, we think about predictable barriers. And so many people hear about UDL and they're like, oh, I get it, lots of choices. I have seen the most horrendous choice boards in my day, because like, let's say that you're like, all right, like we're all going to read this novel. I'm going to give a ton of choices. You can dress up as your favorite character. You can write an alternative ending. You can discuss what the theme is. You can draw a poster. You can make a movie trailer. And it's like, what standard are you focusing on? Those are all completely different standards. And therefore, it's a pointless project. It's a waste of time, because it needs to be firm goals, flexible means. And the magic of UDL is, what options can I provide that would lead everyone to the same goal? And so again, if I'm having people over and my goal is amazing fun night, and in that amazing fun night, you know, everybody has an opportunity to choose something that they really enjoy eating. That's very different from my running clubs coming over the night before we go run a marathon. I'm going to put very, very different options on that buffet. And so the first step is just recognizing you can't plan for specific students without completely burying yourself in planning. But then additionally, students are going to change. So the thing that you designed specifically for a student might not work. And so instead, it's like, what are the barriers that we can predict? So Allison, do you want to add on to that at all?
I just want to add a little bit. I love it. I love, you know, I'm so happy that we've collaborated. So one of the things that I think UDL can give us in a very powerful way, when you were talking about all the different labels for all the different learners, the thing that was missing from all that was the learning brain. And what I think is so exciting and equitable about UDL is we assume we all have learning brains. And so we understand learning in a deeper way when we think about the variability of a learning brain. And this applies to every single human on the planet. It makes me so excited to think about this learning is what takes place with a 1-year-old and my dad who's retired. Our brains work this way. And so the more we're able to appreciate this variability and then start to think about what our goals are for different circumstances, whether it's running a marathon, having a meal. I often laugh about, my brother used to work on a cruise ship. It's really fun to think about the design of cruise ships in terms of the variability of the people going onto that cruise ship. So once we start to really think about that variability of humans, of all of us, that unites all of us, and where we want to go, what those goals are, what those outcomes are, we want to go for gold with our goals, then we can start to get really intentional and have so much fun in the actual planning of it.
And the other thing is too, is there might be some special educators on here right now that are like, how on earth does an IEP work if you're not planning for students? What we're talking about is the design of an entire learning environment. And what we know is that UDL can be absolutely supplemented with differentiated instruction and specially designed instruction. But the better you are at universally designing a learning environment and teaching and learning strategies and methods and materials and assessments, the less that you will have to provide this specially designed instruction and this differentiated instruction on the back end. I remember when I was a general education teacher and I had learned about UDL. And so for me, it was such commonplace to say, all right, so like, here's the standard and this is what we're going to do. And as you're writing, you can choose what you want to write about and you can sign up for writing conferences and there's exemplars and there's graphic organizers and there's sentence stems and you can revise it. And then I would look at the IEP and I would literally say, all of these things I'm just doing for everyone. And, that's the type of thinking is what is necessary for some kids is absolutely good for them all. And one example that I'm using a lot lately is this concept of audiobooks. So, the audiobook was created originally because some people visually could not take in text or they didn't have the ability to decode. So the audiobook becomes necessary for someone who isn't able to see, who has visual impairments, or somebody who can't decode at that level. And so it is necessary for some. So in a classroom, a lot of people will say, okay, everyone's going to read a novel, but those kids can't read, and I'm going to give them the audiobook. And the reality is, I am a very strong reader and I don't have any visual impairment. I love audiobooks. And we often say, I don't want them to choose it because it's easy. And the reality is easy has nothing to do with it. If the goal is that I comprehend and process ideas and think about theme, there is not easy or hard, whether I read it in text or whether I read it in listening to it. And some people say, but kids have to be able to read. Well, here's a spoiler alert on that. The foundational reading standards end in 4th grade. So if you teach any grade beyond 4th grade, you're not working on foundational reading standards. That happens in reading intervention, which would be a tier 2 support. And I think that knowing that your goal is students understand characterization and theme and point of view, they have to be able to access the text. And saying that, they have to be able to read is excluding them from working towards grade level standards. So allowing everyone to choose from that audiobook really lets you say, okay, you know what, you eliminate the stigma, it's good for everybody, but I'm doing this because my goal is theme, my goal is characterization, my goal is understanding the Civil War. It is not basic foundational reading skills. So Allison, dive into tried and true techniques, because this is the part that's like, soul opening, gut wrenching.
I had this great conversation not too long ago with a chemistry teacher, a high school chemistry teacher. And I don't know how many of you teach science or how many of you remember from your high school science, the labs, doing labs. How many of you remember doing science labs? And there's a lot of reading traditionally in those labs. And I really pushed back. This is kind of getting to your point you were just sharing there, Katie. Is the goal really for your students to read the labs, or is the goal about them being able to do the lab techniques or understanding the big concepts that are coming out of the lab? So yes, this applies to higher ed as well. I taught all of these labs in community colleges, so this applies to higher ed, Jen. And so, but the teacher kept saying, no, they need to be able to read this lab. And so that was a tried and true technique, something that, here are labs that have been tried and true. They've been used for years and years. I'm thinking of an organic chemistry lab I did in college, where you separated milk and you're able to, isolate the casein. I never read any of the content in the lab report. I pretty much would go in and try to wing it and try to look at what other people were doing. And so this chemistry teacher, we said, what if you took out some of the text and replaced it with images? And she was very reluctant to change this, but once she took the text out, some of the text out, and replaced them with images, what she found blew her away, because students stopped asking questions like, what do I do next? What's the next step? Or, oh, I skipped this step. Oh, what's the name of this flask that I'm using? And instead, they got through the lab with ease, and they got to the higher level concepts and the big questions that come at the end as a result of the lab. They got to that sooner with fewer barriers, and they had so much more of a rich conversation and discussion around higher level content, because students were able to get beyond decoding all of the text in the lab. So I share that as just a really simple example of how all of a sudden this tried and true technique of the lab packet was transformed by something really simple, just changing some of the text to be visuals. Making sure that the core steps of the lab were bulleted and clear, and it got students to much more expert learning. So I'm curious, in hearing a couple of the examples that Katie and I are sharing, what's a tried and true technique that you feel yourself kind of holding on to a little bit, but you might start to step back and think about the variability, recognize the full range of students that you're going to have, really hone in on the goal of what that activity is, what was the goal of the lab period for that teacher, and then start to let go of what could be a design thing that you could add into that experience to really help break down some of the barriers that are blocking students, often traditionally underserved students, from being able to achieve that goal.
One of the things, Allison, that I'm thinking about too is that a couple of people were saying, well, what does this look like in higher ed? And I actually wrote a textbook with Dr. Sean Bracken from the UK, and it was about
There's a really good
something like, international implementation of UDL in higher ed. And I'm also a higher ed instructor. I've taught graduate courses for years. And, I think especially in this remote setting, a lot of higher ed teaching and learning is currently looking like, I'm going to put everything in a discussion board, and I'm going to say, you're going to read this chapter, you're going to, read these papers, and then you're going to post in the discussion board. And I think that most graduate courses are designed like that. My co-author for UDL in the Cloud, Tom Thibodeau, who's also my daddy, he is an assistant provost at a college, and he is in the Office of Teaching and Learning, and he does training with all of his faculty. And he says that right now, a lot of faculty, they're moving to discussion boards on Blackboard or Canvas or Moodle. There's so many learning management systems. But essentially, an instructor is basically, I'm using the word dumping to be fresh, but dumping a bunch of content into a module that says everyone's going to read this and now discuss. And then the classic is you have to reply to 2 of your classmates. And that does not result in engaged learning. For me, I know that would result in me calling it in pretty quick. And so a universally designed class would say, what is the goal of this module? The goal of this module is to understand what the importance is of understanding this process of unlearning. And so I would then say to my graduate students, what's the best way for you to learn this? You have an option to join an online lecture with me. I'm going to do a webinar for a half hour. I'll also post the recording, so if it's not the best time, you can watch it later. And then you're going to have a lot of different opportunities to learn about the unlearning cycle. Would you rather, I'm skipping ahead. Would you like to read some peer-reviewed articles for, if you're feeling like I need to see the research? look at the peer-reviewed articles. Would you like to see a TED Talk on it? Would you like to look at examples of teacher blogs, people who have gone through the process on their own? Look at these before and after exemplars of student work. And you're basically saying, like, choose the resources that will allow you to answer this essential question, to meet this essential goal. And the options for expressing what you know need to be relevant and authentic and meaningful. A discussion is not necessarily, if I am learning about UDL, I want to make something that I can use in a faculty meeting. I don't want to write a reflection. And so, when you say, okay, I want you to take in all this information, those are your options and choices. Again, you can do it synchronously, you can do it asynchronously, and then I want you to take what you've learned and I want you to apply it in a meaningful way. So you can either write a reflection if you find that to be meaningful, and you could do that in a blog, record a video, record a podcast. It might be that you decide that you want to share this with your own colleagues. So create an agenda for a PLC, create a slide deck for a PLC, write an email or a newsletter to your colleagues. And a module would look like that. And when we swoop back, we say, well, what really is the point? The objective of the course was you learn about the unlearning cycle and apply it into your classroom. I can give you so many different options to learn about the unlearning cycle. I can give you access to so many different materials to look at, and then I can allow you to express what you know in a really meaningful way. As opposed to this kind of like, everyone reads the same article, everyone posts a reflection to said article, everyone has to reply 2 times. I want authentic engagement. I don't want forced engagement. So that would be an example of how you transform a tried and true technique at the higher education level.
And I just want to point out, because now there's a question about, well, how does this apply to primary? And let me just share something. In all learning situations, this one including what we're doing right now, if you think, so now I've done a little diagram, but if you think there's someone presenting information, right? Whether you're a first grade teacher sitting, in a chair reading a story to the whole class, or you're a college professor standing up at the front of the room to a large lecture hall, or to someone on a webinar standing here, sitting here talking to several hundred people, there's information that's going out to you all, to all of those learners. And if it's only going in one way, if you're only hearing, for example, the words I'm saying, that's going to block many of you out. But by having captions, now we're going to hit a few more folks. By being able to have a recording that you can listen to later, that's going to hit a few more folks. So by having several ways that information can go from one person to another, regardless of the age, is going to make it more accessible for folks. And then on the flip side, often, now I'm thinking of my own example in elementary school, where I remember, being called on, and participation, actually probably through high school, was judged by, do you raise your hand and say words out loud to participate in class? That's only one way of participating. If the goal is to get me to speak and say words in class, that's one goal. If the goal is participation can look very different. It could be participating in an online chat that's going on. It could be, right now you have the opportunity to have this group chat. We hope that you will pick up and do some Twitter. We hope that you have different ways that you're able to share and connect and to share with each other, to participate with each other. So the idea is, regardless of the age, we're thinking about the goal, and we're thinking about multiple ways to get at that goal. And we're going to use UDL to think about it in terms of 3 things. One, how are we engaging it? How are we trying to make it relevant? And whether this is, again, whether you're working with pre-primary little kiddos, or you're working with my dad who, is in his 70s and is going to online classes, we're going to be thinking about different ways of engaging them in the information. Why do they care? When you're sending assignments home during this remote learning time, the first question I encourage you to ask is, why does this matter? Why should kids care? How is this kids, meaning anyone, learners, care? What's important to them? Is it relevant to them in some way? Try to make those connections. It'll go really far. And then the second question you can ask is, well, how is the information being represented? If it's only in one way, know that that's going to lock a lot of folks out. And then the third question is, how can students, learners of all ages, show what they know and participate in an active way with that information? And if you just ask of any learning experience, those 3 questions, they align to the UDL guidelines, as I'm sure you all were picking up on, you're going to be able to have a much more rich design that will allow you to transform some of those tried and true techniques. And thank you, Katie, because you're noticing that I jumped to our next slide, which is really thinking about that critical role of engagement. Engagement is not separate from learning. Emotions aren't ever separate from learning. In fact, the whole, like you have social emotional learning and then cognitive academic learning makes me crazy because all learning is social and emotional. And when your emotions are in a positive space, again, it'll be variable for everyone, but in a positive space where you're ready to learn, you will be able to learn. But if you're stressed, if you've had any sort of trauma, if you don't feel comfortable in the environment, if you're a little bit nervous about, COVID and some of the real heartaches that are going on right now, that is going to tap your cognitive energy. So like Katie, when you were saying that you've been feeling tired lately, a lot of people were like, yes, this really resonates. I've been feeling that way too. And I think what's going on is right here, and I love this image, Lindy, that you did, is that our brains are a little more full these days because we're having to unlearn so much. We're having to do so much differently. And there's a lot of emotional unrest with a lot of what's going on. So it's tapping us. So then when we go to do some of our simple, quote unquote, cognitive academic kind of activities, it feels a little more overwhelming than it used to. So we wanted to invite you now, knowing that stage 4 of the unlearning cycle is around engagement, to really think about what are some factors now that are impacting your cognitive load. And Katie, I don't know if you want to add on to that.
No, again, I think that this is huge. We talk about trauma-informed teaching as though there's, only certain students who, experience adverse effects. And the reality is that so many of us, especially right now, are experiencing some, really negative effects, such things as economic insecurity, income insecurity, food insecurity, all of that, in addition to worrying about healthcare and being in really enclosed spaces and feeling socially isolated. And, the reality is it's even under the best of circumstances, learning is very hard. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. It requires the ability to self-regulate. And we're adding on all of this weight on top of that, and then expecting everyone to pivot and continue to learn while we're taking away much of the supports that people are accustomed to. And so, I think that we just have to step back and recognize that a part of what we do to support people, or we, provide options and choices, needs to be, how do we allow people to be mindful, to reflect, to really think about all of the options they have available, to really go heavy on those scaffolds and supports. If we're asking someone to do something, making sure that we have the option for them to get office hours or additional help. And I'm talking about primary, kindergarten and first grade, letting parents know, here's your options and choices for the week. If ever you feel stressed out, know that every day I'm going to be on Zoom from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. You can just jump in. You can ask me questions. Here's my phone number. If you email me, I check my emails every day from 3 to 5. I'll get back to you in those 2 hours. Letting people know what are all the options, because their cognitive loads are getting incredibly full. And when you tap out, you don't learn. And so how can we allow people to keep some sort of balance? And one of the things that I also want to express is there were a couple of people, I made a comment recently just about this idea that, as a middle school, as a high school teacher, I am not going to just continue to put books in my kids' hands that they don't have the ability to decode yet. And I don't have an anointing oil that's going to make a non-reader a reader tomorrow. And therefore, I can exclude the child, or I can provide them with some accessible way to deal with the ideas. And so somebody had sent me a message and they're like, does that mean you don't focus on reading at all? And as a tier 1, I always use mentor text. Always. So I'm not going to have my whole class go through a whole class novel, but like when you're talking about dialect, Mark Twain was a master. There's very few people that can pull off dialect like Mark Twain or like a Ta-Nehisi Coates, right? So we look at these amazing writers, and we say, like, let's read a couple of pages of Twain, and let's read a couple of pages of Ta-Nehisi Coates, and we're going to close read it. We're going to read it multiple times. I'm going to read it out loud, and let's talk about, specific, explicit instruction and comprehension. And in a lot of ways, I am still supporting reading. But the reality is once I say, we read this for dialect, I want you to choose a book that's linguistically appropriate and culturally sustaining. And I want you to pay attention to the dialect. And does the person do it as well? Or what would you change about it, right? At that point, I want them to access grade level text. And that might mean that they access it in an audio, or that they access it by reading with a partner, or that they access it in another language. And I will promote that, and I will fight for that until the day that I am no longer here, because every kid deserves access to really rigorous, culturally sustaining, and linguistically appropriate ideas at grade level, no exceptions. So when we talk about engagement, we also talk about this concept of high expectations. How do we make it clear that we believe that all kids can learn at grade level? And in some ways, that comes back to our belief in ourselves to design something that is equitable enough and inclusive enough that will work for every single kid. And when we can't design it, that's when we exclude kids and put them somewhere else. And that is not what UDL is about. And so when we think about these options and choices, although it's really uncomfortable to think about, like, oh, I hate the idea of providing access to audio or letting them choose their own book. The alternative is 6 out of 10 kids will never learn to read at grade level. And many of them hate reading and writing because they've never experienced a text that they connected to. So, Allison, would you like to talk about this concept of how can we support our learners to become more expert learners, which means they are going to choose what matters to them, what connects to them cognitively, what speaks to them and their culture and their identity and their families in every subject area?
Yes, you know, Katie, it was interesting as you were talking, I was reminded of a study that CAST was doing a number of years ago that was around middle school literacy. And we went into a number of classrooms and asked students just, you know, a really simple question, hey, what do you like to read? And so many said, whatever the teacher gives me. And it was just this moment of like, oh, you know, is this really our goal for our teaching and learning, our education? How can we get learners to really be invested, to be engaged, and to get to these high level texts like you're talking about? And I'm going back to the science example, to get students to be able to read high level journal level articles. How do we get them to this? And I think we have some strong ideas that have some good to them, and we're going to push on them a little bit. So this idea of equality, we have to make sure we at least give everyone the same starting place. We know that that's impossible, right? We're all coming from so many different places. We know there's going to be this tremendous variability. To just give everyone the same stool, as you're seeing in that first image there, and to have a teacher or someone else doing, is traditionally, I think, how classrooms and students, even if you do a Google search now of classrooms, this is what you see. You see someone standing in front of the room and others watching in the quote unquote same chairs, same stools. And we try to get and push on equity more, that you're going to get what you need when you're in this environment. And when I share this cartoon before, I often say, I'm the little one, I'm short, I'm 5'2", I'm going to be the little kid who needs the tall stool. And this is good. This is really important to have tall stools, short stools, different kinds of stools. But a problem, a potential barrier for this, is that I start to become known as the tall stool kid. And to a certain amount, that might help and work and be part of my identity and could be very important to me, and that's good and rich. There are other times when that label could instill a fixed mindset of what I can and cannot do based on my small stature. And so this is where we really want to push again on this idea of expert learning, which is the third part of that cartoon, where you see there's not just one counter and one teacher and one way of doing that others are watching, but we're thinking about having dynamic environments that are adjustable. So the stools are adjustable and the tables can go up and down, and you can work with different people and collaborate in different ways with the different individuals who are there, or remotely now with the world, people from across, I'm thinking of all the people who are here with us today. And then how can we really get at this expert learning where the learners themselves are inspired and are motivated and are purposeful, and they're wanting to engage in these tasks with us. So it's not just the teacher designing and delivering and giving everyone what they think they need, but it's really about all of us together focusing on these high-level goals, these rigorous, meaningful goals that are important to our society, that are important to our world. Right now, what I love about this crisis, and it's hard to love there's a lot of that I don't love, but one of the pieces that's really inspiring me is that as a globe, we are thinking about this issue together. And I don't know about you, but it brings good optimism optimism to my heart that we can work together to get at some of these really hard problems and challenges that we're facing these days. So let's work together and think about, what do we need in these environments? How can we engage in meaningful, rigorous learning opportunities? And how are we intentionally designing for those?
And the other thing is, Allison and I created this because I think all of you know that image that's like equity and equality, and it's like these kids at a baseball game, right? And I'm going to tell you why I hate that image, right? So you know the one, right? It's like the first one, you have this fence, right? And like there's little Allison, and you know she's over the fence, and then there's like me, and I can like little peek over the fence, and we go, okay, clearly when we're all standing on the same size box, we don't all see the game. And then the next one is like, well, now we're going to stack up the boxes. So Allison, because she is shorter than I am, she gets like 2 boxes, and I only need 1 box, and we can see.
And I'm just going to mention, and Katie always wears heels, which gives me, short one, an even greater disadvantage. So
I love a good 4-inch red heel. I love it.
I now own 4-inch heels, so I can start to see over the fence too.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the big win, right? This image has always pissed me off because the UDL one, they take away the stools and they put the kids behind a chain link fence. They're not even in the damn game. They're like stealing the game from a half a freaking mile away. And so it's like, oh, great. That's the goal. Like, you're not even, take me out to the ball game so I can stand behind a chain link fence 300 yards out and never catch a ball. Like, that's not how it goes, right? So I'm like,
that's the goal.
That's the freaking goal. UDL is like, well, you can stand behind a chain link fence, but we're never going to let you into the game. And so I'm like, no. So Allison and I are like, well, this sucks. Excuse me, that word is not allowed in my house. This is terrible, because the reality is you will never, ever, ever, ever learn to love baseball until you are in the stadium. You are a part of the game. You are slapping hand. Oh my God, we might not be able to slap hands again.
But I've never been allowed to play in a hockey game with my son. So look at that.
That's why you hate it. That's why you hate it. And so the reality is so much of what we do with students is like observe, observe, observe. You know, I'm going to dump this content, absorb content, you know, as if it's just like filling things into the brain. And the reality is like, they have to grapple with this information. If you want to learn how to make cookies, make cookies. Don't watch a bunch of like cooking shows and read recipes. That's a start, yes. But expert learning is about doing. It is about taking action. It's about being resourceful, and it's about being motivated. And that can't happen behind a damn chain link fence in the outfield.
And you might make mistakes sometimes. You're going to get hit in the face with the baseball sometimes. You're going to trip and fall. You're going to be distracted sometimes, and that's okay, because those mistakes are part of what build your learning and have it be so much more rich and meaningful. I remember my son one time, we were on a bike ride, and he rode his bike right through the middle of a puddle and got stuck. And he just turned and looked at me and he goes, "Mom, I didn't make a very good choice on that one." Because I had told him numerous times, you don't want to go through the puddles, but until he did it himself, he wasn't able to self-reflect on why that mattered, why that was important. He's always remembered it since. So we have to let students make some of those mistakes.
And the reality is, Allison, that like all of us here, like making good choices requires making bad choices. So there's 300 people on this call right now. Woo. I want you to respond right now in the chat. If the person that you are currently coupled with, who is your partner, is the only partner you've ever had, the only person you've dated, the only person that you have kissed, the only person anything, okay? I want you to say, yeah, I see, hell no. Okay, yep, wow, hard no. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna say. 1, there's 2.
Yes, look.
2, okay, 3. So there's like 300 of us. There's like
no way.
And you know what that means? 297 of us made terrible mistakes, and we learned from them. And like my husband Lon is absolutely amazing, amazing, amazing. I know that, you know, my sister's on here, my sister-in-law's on here, and also my best friend in the whole world, my college roommate, I saw that she's on here. They know how many people I've dated, and it wasn't pretty. But let me tell you, it brought me to Lon Novak. And so for all of the kids who are like choosing this and choosing this, and you're like, oh my gosh, why did they keep choosing the video? What a terrible choice. You know what? Let's look in the mirror, because I made a lot of the same bad choices. But the thing is that I was always reflective, and every time I made a better choice, you know, so you could go back in the timeline and be like, oh, and if any of my exes are on this call, I'm sorry. But the reality is we learn what works for us by learning what doesn't work for us. So yeah, Sarah Goebel, my best friend, my college roommate, she just gave an emphatic yup. And if you put any details in this chat, we're not friends anymore. So anyway, love you, love you, love you, love you, girl. So as we go on, what I just want you to think about is this process takes us through this predictable place where we say, you know what, I have to recognize that variability is the rule. And that takes a long time to understand. And once you get through that, then you start saying, what really are my goals? Okay, as an English teacher, my goal was never to teach of mice and men. You know, my goal was never that people had to write, you know, papers using blue or black ink in a 5-paragraph format, you know, and yet I did so much of that. And once I recognized I don't have to do that, it allowed me to create much better choices. Through those choices, kids started making choices. And the reality is it's messy, it's ugly. It requires them to continue to persevere, and it requires us to continue to persevere. But ultimately, in doing that, we see glimmers of brilliance and hope, and we see that everybody has the potential to be a young scholar. And when we can see that through different avenues, it allows us to let go of some of the things that we held on to for a long time. And that's when we move into prioritizing this concept of engagement and really valuing expert learning. Because a lot of what we do, the focus is on building knowledge in kids, and that is not as important as teaching a kid how to be a learner. And that requires that we let go, that we take our power and transfer it to students. And in doing that, we honor them as the scholars that they are, and we allow them to make choices that are, again, linguistically appropriate, accessible, engaging, and then most importantly, culturally sustaining, because kids need to see themselves in the design of the learning that we create. So we are down.
We need to also, just really quickly, we also need, it was so well said, we need to also be willing to scaffold the skills that they may not already have. I hear this all the time. Well, by this, you know, by 5th grade, they need to know how to do this. By high school, they need to know how to do this. Well, they're in college now, they need to know how to do this. If we won't show them how to do those, if we won't scaffold what those skills are that we think they need to have, when are they going to get those? And we run the risk of losing those students because of that rigorous idea that we have, that rigor means not giving those scaffolds. So I often, you know, worry that sometimes rigor is conflated with not teaching and not scaffolding. And so really reflecting on what those scaffolds are doing and who they're benefiting and how they're in service of that expert learning will absolutely transform your practice. I did also want to share that we hope that after all of this hard thinking, that you also enjoy one of our cocktails that's at the end of the book. Katie and I have yet to be able to share one of these live, but we will soon. I'm confident we'll be able to see each other.
How many education books is the last page a cocktail recipe? That is who we are, my friends. And so again, we definitely, there's lots of options and choices. You can have a virgin cocktail. But somebody asked, the last question I want to answer, and we'll get you off on time in 3 minutes, is that somebody says, what about if we adopted a district curriculum? Now, I will tell you right now, none of you have a district curriculum that is universally designed. You can record that, you can show anyone. There are some brilliant, brilliant evidence-based curriculum programs, but none of them are effective with every single learner in an inclusive classroom. And therefore, what you need to do is, I'm a huge, huge supporter of curriculum. I think it's amazing to give teachers tools to work with, because the alternative is like you're a carpenter with no tools. And so I believe that curriculum is a tool. You do not work for your curriculum works for you. And so when you look at your curriculum, you basically look at the unit and you say, okay, so here's the standard, this is awesome. These are the learning activities that are a part of this. Are there any barriers here that I can predict? And when you can predict those barriers, you can provide additional scaffolds and additional options. And so I used a curriculum for a very long time, and I'll never forget, there was an essential question in like a Journeys program that was essentially, how do inventions help athletes? And it was all about learning about problem and solution, trying to glean problem and solution out of reading, and how to write a problem and solution. So it was a very beautifully designed unit. You know the sports they talked about? Basketball and track and field. So dominant culture, it was ridiculous. So I took it and I said, okay, I see a problem with this because we're all reading these articles as though to be athletic, you have to be good at basketball and track. And that's like a really, really exclusionary thought process. And so I looked at it and I said, okay, we're gonna look at the essential question. We're gonna do some of these activities, and then let's brainstorm. I want you to think about, when you think of something that is athletic, what do you think of? You can draw pictures, you can write it. I had kids doing hunting and fishing and video games and dancing and gymnastics. And I said, okay, we're all gonna closely read this article about basketball, but then you're going to say the sport that you love, that speaks to you, the athlete in you. What is one invention that made people more effective? Like at hunting, you know, guns got better. In video games, they have like the headphones that let you talk to people. And so I said, that's what I want you to do. And so I used my curriculum, okay? We still asked the same questions. We still wrote a response, but I said, you can use Google Read and Write if you want. You can create a video, but I need to make sure that you understand what are the problem and solution transition words. How do we come up with main ideas and details from a problem and solution macro structure? How do you write about problems and solutions? But again, by providing options and choices and exemplars and rubrics and opportunities for students to make it real, that curriculum became universally designed. But do not think that you can open anything out of a box. No matter what curriculum developers tell you, they are lying. And so that is my final aside. Ron, I have to know who won, me or Allison. Who moves more? Come on, Ron. Give it to us, Ron Rogers. Oh, it's a tie. Everyone, look at Amy. Oh, yes, Susan. I think Katie would vote for me no matter what, because the Katies are like this. But anyway, it was so great to connect with all of you. We're so excited about this book, Unlearning, and sharing it. Certainly feel free to contact Allison or I. Lindy, Ashley, if you could just put our Twitter handles in there, and then we will follow up by sending you a copy of this video. You're welcome to share it. We'll also give you a copy of the chat, so you'll have a transcript of the chat, a lot of really good resources there. And we'll also make sure that you have the closed captioning, so that way you could read the transcript if that is better for you. So lots of options and choices to move on. And we were just so happy to get to Allison. It's always amazing to talk to you. I just love working with you, and having 300 friends here has been really awesome as well.
Yes, thank you all so much for joining us today from all over. Please take good care.